So Tristan, Alex, thanks for joining me today on this panel. Maybe just to start off with, tell us a little bit more about your respective efforts. What are you working on these days?
Yeah, thank you, Irene. It's great to be here. I'm co-founder and co-CEO of Calm, which is a popular app that helps people to primarily find calm, but we teach that through meditation. We also have some other content, but it's primarily meditation. And our mission is to bring these ancient techniques that for a wider audience are pretty esoteric and tricky to understand, and make them accessible, make them simple to understand, and create a product that weaves meditation into people's busy modern lives.
Thanks for having me too. I'm Tristan, and I used to be, a design ethicist at Google, where I was focused for 4 years on the issues of how do you ethically steer 1 billion people's thoughts and behaviors when you make design choices about how a smartphone works and things like that. And I left to participate in conversations like this and start a movement called Time Well Spent, which is about changing the incentives of the attention economy from this race to the bottom to get attention at all costs, to instead being about a race to help people fulfill human values or spend their time well spent. So that's what I work on now, and I'm excited to be here.
Tell us more about Time Well Spent and this whole idea of helping people get their attention back.
Well, there's the most common narrative in Silicon Valley is this idea, in the world actually, that technology is neutral. That Snapchat's just this tool, and then it's just up to us to choose how do we want to use it. And I think to just name the elephant in the room, this is just not true. The attention economy is a competition for attention at all costs. If you are a meditation app, if you're a game, if you're the New York Times, if you're a news website, if you are Facebook, you're competing for attention. So Netflix wants your attention, YouTube wants your attention, everyone needs your attention to be successful because of the business model of advertising. And the best way to get people's attention is to know what persuades them or what pushes their buttons. So, Justin was just on stage and he did Justin TV, and he figured out if you just sort of put a camera to your head, it's a really good way of getting people's attention. But there's a difference between what works at getting our attention versus what's good. And that distinction usually we don't even think about it. And so Time Well Spent is an effort to change the conversation about both how we think about how we design technology and also changing the incentives so that instead of competing to maximize how much attention you get, you're competing and rated based on how much of a positive difference you make in people's lives.
I think of it a lot like sugar.
Yeah.
The very things that make us attracted to sugar, sometimes those are exactly what's wrong or bad for our health. And in a lot of ways, what draws our attention is exactly where we should not be spending our time.
Yeah, for example, the whole fake news thing. Outrage is a wonderful way of getting people's attention. It works extraordinarily well. All I have to do is just show you something that generates outrage, and it works at getting your attention. In fact, it works not just at getting your attention, but then sharing it to all these other people and saying, can you believe the thing, right? And it works. And so if you have some algorithm like the newsfeed, and it's trying to figure out what should I put in front of people, and Facebook needs to maximize how much attention it gets. And so here's the newsfeed algorithm just saying, well, what works? And it just figures out that outrage really works. It's going to put outrage at the top of the newsfeed because that's what works. Not because there's some designer who says, oh, this will be good, but just because that's what works. And so we have to be able to decompose this difference between what works, like sugar, and what actually is what we want in the world. But we have to actually really pay attention to that.
So how do we do this? How do we raise awareness? How do we gain our attention back or manage it in more healthful ways?
Well, this is a big conversation. The conversation about how we get our attention back tends to come down to personal habits. It usually gets talked about that way. How can I live better with my phone? How can I use more meditation apps? How can I turn off notifications. There's some small things we can do, turning off notifications, setting aside, putting our phone not in the bedroom when we sleep, putting all the non-tool apps on the other screens in your phone. But these are limited, I think, when the actual phone itself or the Facebook product itself is fundamentally designed to get as much attention as possible. So, there are a set of behavioral recommendations. Time Well Spent as a website has some for people. I've written about many of them, but I think we actually need to have a conversation about the design to change. And a good metaphor for this is cars. When cars were first invented, they gave people individually these incredible new capabilities. You can go all these new places by yourself. It's super empowering, right? A smartphone is like a car. You can go to all these amazing new places. You can do all these amazing new things. But cars also did a few other things. They isolated us, and they polluted the environment. So when we realized that cars, also smartphones, isolated us and then pollute the inner environment, or they pollute the social environment, the answer isn't let's get rid of cars, right? The answer is how do we make a car that doesn't pollute the environment and maybe have things that bring people together more? How do we redefine urban planning so that the city and cars work better together? And I think we're coming to terms with a new era where we have to do the same thing with phones. We have to change the design so it doesn't pollute the inner environment as much. And that means the thoughts and feelings and comparison and outrage and all the other stuff that it generates, those are all on a list of kind of like externalities or pollution that we would want to minimize and say, okay, so how would we design it differently? So,
interesting. So, Alex, how do you think about this?
Well, I think what Tristan says is definitely key. I think there's a lot of work to be done on the systemic design that is concentrated, it seems, these days in the power of very few people. And it was interesting listening to the panel prior to us about about the design of those systems. And it's kind of encouraging. I'm pretty optimistic that technology will eventually solve the problems it creates. Like, technology is just about solving problems over time. It means there's a lag, but I think eventually it will. It's encouraging that Mark Zuckerberg talked about his responsibility to, reduce the spread of fake news, to increase empathy and compassion and sense of community and belonging, and not just to enable the spread of the most sensationalist content. So that's really exciting. I also do think that for individuals, it starts with awareness. And if you find yourself addicted to your phone and you're mindlessly scrolling every day, which I think a lot of people do, including myself, right? I mean, it's an ongoing battle. These systems have been so well designed to grab attention at any cost. But with training in mindfulness, we can interrupt that pattern of incessant consumption. And I think that the increasing popularity of apps like Calm, and more broadly the increasing popularity of mindfulness and meditation, and then more broadly again of mental fitness as a trend. Like, we're suddenly realizing our minds are really important and we should take care of them. And the information we consume and the way we spend our attention is super important. There's kind of perhaps been a bias towards looking after our physical bodies for the last 40, 50 years. And I think the tide is now beginning to turn, or not turn, but so much as people realizing that mental fitness is important. So I think there's work to be done on both sides. The systems need to be designed with compassion and empathy and thoughtfulness and mindfulness. And it's taken some time. We were having a conversation backstage how, why has it taken Mark Zuckerberg so long to realize the incredible power that he and his managers have in the influence Facebook has on people's attention. But I'm optimistic that we'll catch up. And in the meantime, we can empower ourselves to take back our attention.
And what you're both talking about is really about encouraging behavior change in people, which is a pretty hard thing to do. I work with a lot of companies in our portfolio that are also trying to promote and encourage behavior change. What kinds of methods or techniques have you employed or have you conceived that could maybe help with this?
Yeah, there's a lot of different tools that are on offer for companies like Calm in the products we design. Sending people push notifications. But we have to be really mindful because we don't want to undermine the premise on which we exist and steal people's attention or give them bad stuff. So the way we do it is it's very much opt-in. You're opting in. But we encourage you to opt in. We explain that there are benefits to being reminded to be mindful throughout the day. But it's an ongoing challenge. And yeah, we are, in actual fact, it's not so much that meditation apps are all competing with each other. It's that we're competing with Facebook because, we're competing with Twitter. Time is limited. So it's up to us to present the best case to the wider world that they should invest more time in not just meditation apps, but taking care of their attention. But yeah, we have to use the tools that we have available and go to where for want of a better word, the fight is. So we have to leverage Facebook and leverage Twitter and leverage the platforms we have because that's where people exist every day, all day.
Yeah, I think what a lot of people don't realize is that there's a playbook of principles, behavior change principles you can use to get people to use products more. I don't know if any of you have heard the names Nir Eyal, who wrote the book Hooked, or BJ Fogg at Stanford, who was a lab I studied at actually when I was at Stanford, called the Persuasive Technology Lab, where they basically teach you this is how you get someone to engage with your product, to come in, to stay longer, and to come back tomorrow. And there's a whole bunch of techniques. I wrote an article called How Technology Hijacks Your Mind that goes through 10 techniques that I recommend reading. And what people often don't realize is that that when they're using a product, that there's deliberate design strategies in these products to get you to use it. Let's take one, for example, that's been referenced recently. Snapchat puts a fireball and a number next to every contact in your address book. So if you're a teenager, you're 16 years old, living in San Francisco, and your top friends, for each one, it shows you how many days in a row you've sent a message back and forth. So if I've sent a message with my best friend, there's a number 150 showing there's 150 days we've gone consecutively.
These are streaks, right?
This is a streak.
Yes, my daughter is obsessed with this.
Yes, the snap streaks. Okay. Super popular feature. Snapchat's the #1 way that teenagers communicate. Okay. So now you could say, if you're a Snapchat designer, now I'm going to add this feature, and it's going to count the number of days people have communicated consecutively. And I'm not doing anything wrong because you can just ignore it, and you don't have to pay attention to it. And yet, at the same time, what's actually going on for kids? Well, it turns out there's a woman at Emily Weinstein at Harvard who studied kids in live situations. When they go on vacation, they give their password to 5 other friends to make sure that their friends keep up their streak for them.
My daughter has done this.
Yeah.
This is a true story.
It's a real thing. And because it's persuasion. We found a button in your brain that says, if I give you a number of consecutive days, even though this is totally meaningless, this just does not matter, but I can convince you, I can give you something to lose. You don't want to lose this. Now that I've invented this manufactured number of 150 precious days in a row, and now you don't want to lose that. So now I've got something you want, and I'm Snapchat, and that helps me get you to use it more tomorrow. So now the question is, what is ethical persuasion? And what is unethical persuasion? And the thing that's unethical about this is that their goals in designing that are not the same as your kids' goals or our kids' goals. And so there really is a misalignment of incentives between what companies want people to do when they design these behavior change things and what we want to do. But that conversation has usually not been illuminated. And so there really isn't this really important conversation that needs to happen.
It's interesting, actually, that exact feature. We use it in Calm.
Exactly.
But actually, but wait. Actually, it works better. I think it's an ethical idea, to use your word, because the practice of mindfulness, which is what we're teaching in the app, is best done on a daily basis. So there's a reason why we want to encourage people to use it every day. And then you take the exact same feature and put it in Snapchat, and it's like, well, you don't really need to use it every single day, right? So it's interesting how you can just change the context and suddenly, like...
When I say the difference is that, let's say there's a person, and their goals for their life are they would like to develop a practice where 5 days in a row, or even 7 days in a row, they would like to have that. So a streak is empowering or cooperative or on their team to help them live by their values.
Right.
As opposed to, over here, the reason Snapchat is doing this is not because it's a person's goal in their life to make sure that they send an arbitrary message. Because actually what happens with people is they're not sending like some thoughtful message. They actually just fire off something just so that they keep up the streak. It could be like a photo of the floor or something like that. And so the difference is, again, back to a respect for autonomy. So do I care about your life, and do I care about what you, on reflection, you say you would like to have with our product? Meaning, do I care that you want to meditate? Duolingo, for example, another app, Duolingo helps people learn languages. And they actually care about letting you set what a streak would be for you. So they even ask you, you might do this too, I don't know.
My co-founder's here. Can you make a note, Michael? That's really great.
But it's an extra way of respecting someone's autonomy. Saying, okay, hey, look, you want to learn French, and you're going to France, and so I'm asking you, I care about you. I'm asking you, what would be time well spent for you? How many days in a row, in a week? What would be a streak that would be on your team? And I'm demonstrating that I care about you. That's not what Snapchat's doing. And that's not what a lot of apps are doing. And that's one of literally thousands of techniques that you learn if you study this field. And I think there's this huge elephant in the room in our whole industry, which is that our industry is run on these behavior change persuasion techniques. And because there are many benefits that do occur, I mean, I'm sure there's someone somewhere in the world who, through Snap Streaks, had some amazing life-altering positive experience happen. It's like someone who swiped through their 800th match on Tinder after hour number 5, and they found like the love of their life. And had Tinder not designed their app like a slot machine, they would have never found the love of their life. So this is a reasoning style. This is a way that people use to justify what's good, because there are positive outcomes that also happen when you use these persuasive techniques. But we have to ask, at what cost? Is it best for everybody to swipe their 800th match? Or for everybody to have Snap Streaks built into the #1 communication tool that you use for an entire demographic? So we have to ask some really deep questions about what's good for people.
So given the scale and the ubiquity of technology, it has vast influence over everyone in their lives and how they see the world and move through it. The makers of technology, designers, developers, product managers, executives, they are in many ways the social engineers of our society now. Do you believe that they have a responsibility to society? Like, should they be thinking about the impact, even if there's a mismatch, or how do we align incentives more thoughtfully so that everyone's moving in a more wholesome way forward? Like, how do you see that?
I think totally they have a responsibility. We have a responsibility. I mean, to some extent, everyone has a responsibility in the community about the spread of information, but I think it is increasingly concentrated in the power of very few people in Silicon Valley. And it's important that we think about these things early on in the process and not wait until we've already reached huge scale. Try and build it into the foundation. It has been 12 years, as you mentioned, for Mark Zuckerberg to take the time to think about the broader impact of information spread through his platform, and perhaps you should have thought about that earlier. But it's tricky, isn't it? Because as founders and entrepreneurs and product managers and executives, the primary goal is to try and make things work, and that's like the main goal, because you have investors, you have employees, and you're trying to we operate in this capitalist society, and so the first thing is how do we make it work? And then it's once it's working, then you can have the time and luxury to elucidate on how we should have maybe designed it early on. But it's chicken and egg, right? Because if you're an entrepreneur starting out and with a new product, and you think you might have the next Snapchat, of which there are probably thousands of entrepreneurs right now in a 5-mile radius of this building who think that it's going to happen, should they be thinking so early? Probably, actually, right? Because some of them are going to break out. So it's a tricky one. You can understand if they don't, but you would hope that they do.
So it really depends on, like he's saying, the stage of the company. So when I was at Google, the way I got to do this design ethics role is there was a presentation that I made actually right before I was thinking I was going to leave that said at the beginning, never before in history have essentially 50 people working at 3 tech companies, Apple, Google, and Facebook, basically been the designers, the urban planners of this city of 1 billion people's attention. And their choices organize this city. So, the apps, the individual apps aren't critical to the urban planning, but these bigger companies, Apple, Google, and Facebook, are really designing. Imagine there's like a city, just like San Francisco, except 1 billion people are living in it. And instead of a public representative government, you have 3 private companies who, just through their own autonomous actions, kind of inadvertently ended up with this city. And it's designed in a certain way. And the way it's currently designed is to suit the goals of those companies. Sometimes those decisions are made consciously, and sometimes they're made unconsciously. For example, Facebook deliberately needs to, because of its business model of advertising, it needs to get people to use the product as much as possible, or at least every day. And so in its corner of the city, it really wants to suck people in and keep you there and just send you in loops and put casinos wherever they can. And I mean, I'm not saying this because there's an evil intention here. I just mean they have to do whatever works. So there's this question, though, of responsibility. So if you're just trying to get your thing to work and you're at the beginning, you don't have the luxury of being able to think about responsibility. But when you're essentially designing now the infrastructure, the public infrastructure that 1 billion people live by, if you're Snapchat, you are the public infrastructure for a certain demographic who communicate every day on your platform for a very specific population of people. And you might think, especially since that population is a lot of teenagers and children, you would want to care. And who are the people as well who are in that design role? What are their ages? What are their backgrounds? Computer science, engineering, mostly men in LA, in the case of Snapchat, designing this product or service. And you don't hear a lot about caring about what's really good for people. And then what would it mean to care? I mean, so what are the backgrounds? What's the diversity of the minds, the experiences, the ethnic backgrounds, the educational backgrounds, academic backgrounds of the people in those rooms? And because of competition, Apple and Google are trying to release the next phone and the next OS every year, that where in your schedule, if you're working at Apple or Google, like imagine looking at the Google Calendar and you go to work, like where's the block of time among all the other stuff you got to do that says, let's think about what's best for people in the city, right? So Arturo Bahar, who spoke here several years ago, at Facebook has done some amazing stuff at Facebook on compassion, right? Where he had this team that was trying to do what's best for people and help reduce cyberbullying. And there are efforts like this at companies, but they tend to be under-resourced because at the end of the day, in a hyper-competitive environment, that stuff gets lower priority than the stuff that increases engagement or keeps people engaged on a platform until you're deeply financially secure and stable. But Apple and Google and Facebook are now in pretty reasonable, strong positions that they could allocate more. And we need to, as consumers, be able to advocate for much more to be done there. And there really needs to be a different accountability system that says, what is our political representation in the system? Where's the public get to say, this city is being deliberately designed in a way that's not best for us. And we want it to be designed in a way that's good for us. And a lot of that problem is advertising.
So for people who are wondering, how can I get my attention back? What advice do you have for us? Whether it's apps or tools or habits, what can we do? What can consumers do?
Download Calm. No, there are obviously lots of different ways. I got into mindfulness by reading a lot of books. Actually, one of my favorite, more recent books is Search Inside Yourself by Chade-Meng Tan, which is a great exploration. There's also another one of my favorites is 10% Happy by Dan Harris. So these are great introductions to mindfulness. There must be some of the team here. But yeah, fantastic book. But apps are a great way, right? Because they're, going back to this thing about design, we've designed our apps and in Calm's sake, designed them to fit in with busy schedules, right? Most people don't even today have the time to read a book. I actually think most books are too long generally, but that's a different conversation. But we've been able to take these really broad, deep concepts and package them up in, I guess, for want of a better word, bite-sized format. It adds up to be very transformational, but we break it down and help you fit it into your modern life. So I would say, explore mindfulness, explore the development of awareness, and take your own attention back. I actually think also it's going to be important that this kind of endeavor is mandated by education systems and government, right? We need to teach kids how to manage their attention from a really early age, and give them the tools so that they can navigate this digital world that they find themselves in from almost the moment they're born. There are kids going up now with iPads and screens, and that's the lens in which they see the world. So we need to give them the internal tools to help them not be mastered by those things, but to be the masters of their own attention. But there's, obviously both sides of it are important.
I know we don't have too much time. What can you do? So one, just concrete recommendations I've spent a lot of time thinking about. Turn off notifications from anything that isn't a person. There's a difference between when a machine wants to reach you and wants your attention, and when a person wants your attention. A text message is when a person wants your attention, or a Facebook message or something like that from a person, versus a notification that says so-and-so tagged you in a photo, or so-and-so posted some new content. These are machines generating notifications with the goal of getting you to come back into their app so that their metrics go up. Not because they're evil, that's their goal. So, one way you can get your attention back is just turning off all notifications except for from people. I think we also need to recognize what it is that's driving us to use our phones. So slowing down and being aware right before I go into one of these apps, what is the actual thing I was experiencing right before that? And usually there's some unconscious loop of anxiety or a moment of stress or an I don't know, or I'm writing the third paragraph of an email and suddenly I don't know what to say and I just grab my phone because it was right there and there wasn't too much of a gap. It's really understanding in slow motion. It's like we don't take a microscope to our own experience and just recognize what was causing me to do that. I also think we have to think about that our phone provides the most immediate, more stimulating, more educational, more productive choice with what to do with my time than anything that reality can offer me if I'm sorting by just what's good for me as an individual. And so if I'm just sorting for what's me as a good individual, I can always get an extra thing done, always check an extra thing, always read another thing, always be entertained. So we have to know, what am I sorting by? Am I just sorting by what's stimulating for me? Or do I care about the social environment?
All right.
Cool.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
So, Tristan, Alex, thanks for joining me today on this panel. Maybe just to start off with, tell us a little bit more about your respective efforts. What are you working on these days?
Yeah, thank you, Irene. It's great to be here. I'm co-founder and co-CEO of Calm, which is a popular app that helps people to primarily find calm, but we teach that through meditation. We also have some other content, but it's primarily meditation. And our mission is to bring these ancient techniques that for a wider audience are pretty esoteric and tricky to understand, and make them accessible, make them simple to understand, and create a product that weaves...
works extraordinarily well. All I have to do is just show you something that generates outrage, and it works at getting your attention. In fact, it works not just at getting your attention, but then sharing it to all these other people and saying, can you believe the thing, right? And it works. And so if you have some algorithm like the newsfeed, And it's trying to figure out what should I put in front of people. And Facebook needs to maximize how much attention it gets. And so here's the newsfeed algorithm just saying, well, what works? And it just figures out that outrage really works. It's going to put outrage at the top of the newsfeed because that's what works. Not because there's some designer who says, oh, this will be good, but just because that's what works. And so we have to be able to decompose this difference between what works, like sugar, and what actually is what we want in the world. But we have to actually really pay attention to that.
So how do we do this? How do we raise awareness?
Silicon Valley is this idea in the world, actually, that technology is neutral. That Snapchat's just this tool, and then it's just up to us to choose how do we want to use it. And I think to just name the elephant in the room, this is just not true. The attention economy is a competition for attention at all costs. If you are a meditation app, if you're a game, if you're the New York Times, if you're a news website, if you are Facebook, you're competing for attention. So Netflix wants your attention, YouTube wants your attention. Everyone needs your attention to be successful because of the business model of advertising. And the best way to get people's attention is to know what persuades them or what pushes their buttons. So, Justin was just on stage and he did Justin TV, and he figured out if you just sort of put a camera to your head, it's a really good way of getting people's attention. But there's a difference between what works at getting our attention versus what's good. And that distinction usually we don't even think about it. And so Time Well Spent is an effort to change the conversation about both how we think about how we design technology and also changing the incentives so that instead of competing to maximize how much attention you get, you're competing and rated based on how much of a positive difference you make in people's lives.
I think of it a lot like sugar.
Yeah.
The very things that make us attracted to sugar, sometimes those are exactly what's wrong or bad for our health. And in a lot of ways, what draws our attention is exactly where we should not be spending our time.
Yeah, for example, the whole fake news thing. Outrage is a wonderful way of getting people's attention.
Meditation into people's busy modern lives.
Yeah, thanks for having me too. I'm Tristan, and I used to be, a design ethicist at Google, where I was focused for 4 years on the issues of how do you ethically steer 1 billion people's thoughts and behaviors when you make design choices about how a smartphone works and things like that. And I left to participate in conversations like this and start a movement called Time Well Spent, which is about changing the incentives of the attention economy from this race to the bottom to get attention at all costs to instead being about a race to help people fulfill human values or spend their time well spent. So that's what I work on now, and I'm excited to be here.
Tell us more about Time Well Spent and this whole idea of helping people get their attention back.
Well, so there's the most common narrative in